Hi Caroline, it's Professor Sebastian. I'm just making a quick video here to give you some feedback about your exam. So just first of all, you're doing fantastic. When I review your exams, you send me your work, which you did. You did a good job. I would just say a little bit, just try to give me a little bit more room to write. You got so little wrong that it's not a big deal. But if you can give me a little bit more room to write to give you some to give me some space to give you better feedback on the written part, but I'll still give you verbal feedback and stuff too. So, but before I reviewed your exam, for my math lab had graded you at 25.5 out of 30, which is 85%. And after I reviewed your exam, I came up with a score of 93%, 27.9 out of 30. And I'll talk to you about that and give you some feedback. So as I got both your quiz pulled up here and your work pulled up here. So let me see, get that in the field of view here so you can see. Okay. So bottom line is, question one, you got completely right. So whenever you get something completely right with my math lab, I really don't take much of a look at it. I put a check mark with this MML here. That means my math lab graded it to be 100% correct. So there wasn't much for me to look at. Then when we get to question two, I circled it because you didn't have it all right, and I took a look at it to see why. When you look at this question, you answered that the men have the least number of awakenings. You said 18 instead of 8. My guess is that you were looking at this tick mark, and then that 20 was in your eyes, and you thought, oh, that's around 18. It's really about 8, right? Because this tick mark here is 10, so it's really around 8. But figuring that you probably misinterpreted that with your eyes a little bit. You had a score of 0.5. I increased it to 0.75. All right. Question three, there really wasn't anything I could do because you just wrote nope on your work. If you showed me a little work here, like you could have said, hey, I would have seen that you were trying to solve for y. So here I said, let's solve for y. X to the fourth plus y to the ninth equals 9. Eventually solve for y, you get y equals the ninth root of 9 minus x to the fourth. And that is indeed a function. An odd root is a function, so that's no problem for any value, whether it's negative or positive inside. So that's okay. Okay, so questions 4 and 5 were all correct. My math lab question 6, you had some little bit of graph analysis here that went a little awry on you. Let's see. In this one, basically what happened is way down here, you had minus infinity to minus 2. So this is intervals where the function is less than 0. So yes, minus infinity to minus 2, but for some reason, and notice this less than or equal to 0. So right at x equals minus 2 is where it crosses, so it's 0 there. So you really should have included minus 2, but that's the only thing you did wrong on this problem. So I raised it from 0.75 right here. I raised it from 0.75 to 0.9. All right, let's see. Questions 5, that was 6, right? So 7, 8, 9, 10. 7, 8, and 9 you had completely correct. 10 you didn't, but it ended up being completely correct because you had the general form as this guy. But if you multiply by 4 everywhere, you get 4y minus 3x minus 26, which is just the opposite of this. And if you multiply this by minus 1, it's fine. So this really is fine. This is just a nicer, neater way of looking at it. People typically like to write as ax plus by plus c equals 0. And you didn't write it that way, but it's still a general form. So I gave you full credit for that. Let's see, 11, 12, fine. Let me go down here to the next page. 13 was fine with my math lab. 14. So you ended up getting 14 completely correct because of your work, and you really just had this one part wrong, g of f of x. You had plus 10x instead of 10x squared, but when I looked at your work, you had 10x squared, so you just didn't put that over into the answer sheet correctly. So let's see, you had circled 17, but 17 was fine, 14, 15, 16, so all the way down to 26 right now is correct. Let's see, yep. So I actually had circled 26 thinking that was the next one you got wrong, but it wasn't. You got that correct with my math lab. So then 27 was algebraic long division. And the biggest thing that messed you up here was that you were dividing by, let's look at the problem here. You were dividing by 3x squared plus 2. So when you're dividing by 3x squared plus 2, you really need to write it as 3x squared, not just plus 2, but you got to go down in 1 power of x every time, and you have to include them. It's like a placeholder for you. So it's easier if you write 3x squared plus 0x plus 2. So then now the same thing should have been done over here. So your numerator was 24x to the fourth plus 15x cubed plus 10x squared. So you really need to add plus 0x plus 0 for the constant term. So when you carry things down, things work out nicer. So probably rather than me tell you everything, you can look at this and work that out again. But I think by not adding those placeholders, you just started to confuse yourself. Okay. Otherwise, you were close. So bottom line is I still thought, well, you still had missed that one big gap there, and that's an important thing to understand long division. So, but I did increase it from 0 to 0.5. And then similarly on 29, which was where you had to find the third degree, you had to find a third degree polynomial that had minus 2 and 2 plus 5i as 0, so it had an imaginary 0. Okay, now you did correctly in the sense of you knew that if you had one imaginary 0, you had to have another imaginary 0, which would be its conjugate. Now the conjugate is you just put the opposite sign in front of the imaginary piece. So it's always going to be x minus the root, right? So you got x plus 2 is correct because it's x minus a minus 2. Then the next root should have been x minus the quantity 2 plus 5i. And then the next one should have been x minus the quantity 2 minus 5i. So you'll see that when you work those out, it works out. You were working stuff out that just wasn't correct. I think you had the idea correctly. Excuse me. I think you had the idea correct. So I did go, from a score of 0 up to a score of 0.75 because you really had the idea correct. It's just that missed it right here kind of hurts you. You have to understand that's x minus the root and what the conjugate actually is. Okay, but other than that, you did really good, and your overall percentage in the course right now is 96.27, so very solid A. You got an A on the first exam, and with all your hundreds on everything else, you're doing great. So keep up the good work. I'll talk to you later.